It's called Knowledge, Intelligence, or Wisdom. And there actually is a difference between knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. And the Bible talks a lot about wisdom, but I want us to just think about what is actually the difference between knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. And one very simple way of looking at this is knowledge is anything that you know. All of your previous experiences, all the different facts that have accumulated in your brain, that is what you would call knowledge. It's something that you've accumulated over time. Intelligence, however, is a little different, because intelligence is not so much what you know or what you experience, but intelligence is more of a skill or an ability where you can actually apply all the things that you've known, all the things that you've experienced, and you apply that to analyze a problem or whatever. So if you think about math, for instance, knowledge in math is you might memorize a bunch of formula, you might have experience in solving a lot of different mathematical problems, but intelligence is what enables you when you are confronted with new mathematical formulae, or when you are encountered with new mathematical problems, even though you've never experienced these things before, because of your intelligence, because you're able to analyze these different things, you're able to just think through on the fly. Wisdom, however, what is that? Well, the way the Bible defines wisdom is actually very different than knowledge or intelligence. Because wisdom, according to the Bible, and what we're going to read in James chapter 2, is not so much what you know, it's not so much a skill set or the ability to analyze or conceptualize, but wisdom is more about how do you actually live. All the resources that you have, all the knowledge, all the experiences, all of your skill set, how are you actually going to utilize that specifically to love others? That's exactly what James is talking about. True wisdom is your ability to effectively love, to make peace, to be gentle, to be sincere, to be pure, to do all these things that the Bible exhorts us to do. Now, in society, out of knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom, which of these three things do you think our society values the most? It's probably intelligence, right? If you're interviewing at a job, they don't really care so much about what you know. They do care about your experience, but what they really want to capture is, are you smart? Are you going to be able to encounter future problems? That's why if you think about standardized testing, for instance, do people know the SATs here? No? Okay. Well, SATs is the standardized test in the United States in order for you to be accepted to a university. And at the start of SAT, like one of the very primitive versions of the SAT, or if you think about any test, they test you on your knowledge. What do you know? But then as time progressed, these tests, now they don't just test you on what you know, but now they actually try to test you on, are you able to solve problems? Are you intelligent? Are you able to take what you know and apply it to solve new issues? So for instance, when I was in software development working, I remember interview questions were all about what do you know? What have you studied in school? What are your experiences? Which programming languages are you aware of? Which databases are you familiar with? But nowadays, if you are interviewing for a software development job, they don't care so much about what you know or what you've experienced. What they do is they give you a test. They give you problems to solve. They say, here is a very difficult issue. I want you to solve this. And what they're really testing is, now they don't really care so much about what you know, but what they care about is this person intelligent? Can this person solve new problems? But in our society, wisdom, even though the Bible says wisdom is superior to intelligence, wisdom is superior to knowledge, in our society, wisdom is actually very underestimated. The ability to love others, are you ever going to hear that in an interview question? Probably not. So let's take a look at what James says in this passage, James chapter 3, verses 13 to 18. So I'll read it out for us. Who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So for today's sermon, it's going to be a very simple outline, and let me just say it up front. The first thing that we're going to talk about is James in today's society. If you're here last week when Elder Young preached about taming our tongue, he said it's a very timely passage, and it indeed is. James, this passage that we're talking about with the wisdom, is so timely and so relevant in today's society. And I'm going to illustrate what that means. But when we think about this society, how it is really, we don't value wisdom, and because of that, there's a lot of jealousy, there's a lot of arguments, there's just a lot of opposition. James is actually talking not so much about society, but he's talking about his church. All this stuff that we just read about, selfish ambition, jealousy, that's actually happening in James's church. So the next part of the outline is the church any different than society? Aren't we also struggling with the same things where we value intelligence and knowledge over and against at the expense of wisdom, where we fail to love each other effectively? And I'm going to tell you, church is very similar to society, but at the same time, it's also radically different. And then from there, we're going to talk about what actually is true wisdom. We're going to dissect this based on what James says. What actually is true wisdom, and how can this actually look like in our everyday lives, in the lives of people here at Uptown? And finally, what we're going to talk about is why does God care so much about wisdom? If our employer or if our interviewer doesn't care so much about wisdom, but they care about our knowledge or intelligence, why is it that God cares so much about wisdom? Let's get started. So James in society. Let me just reread some of these verses. Who is wise? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. The first thing that we really need to emphasize is true wisdom is evidenced by your good conduct and the meekness of your wisdom. So like I mentioned, wisdom is not so much what you know, it's not so much how intelligent you are, but it's more about how you actually live out your life, your conduct. Are you being meek with your wisdom? And contrast that with the problem that was happening in James's church is there was a lot of bitter jealousy and selfish ambition. Not only was there bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, he repeats this again, for where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder in every vile practice. How many of us follow Twitter or have a Twitter account? No? Nobody? Okay, yeah, don't be ashamed. I love Twitter. Personally, I use Twitter mostly because I'm a sports fanatic, and Twitter, you get real-time news, like faster than ESPN.com. It happens through tweets. And a lot of athletes, they actually announce some of their things through tweets. But one of the reasons why I also like Twitter is I find it so fascinating because it's one window and perspective into how our society thinks. And I don't know if this is a case in Canada, but at least in America, right now America is so polarized by partisans, the Republicans and the Democrats. And here, I'm not trying to make any kind of political assertions here, but one thing that I love about Twitter, one thing that I find Twitter so fascinating is Twitter is really the battleground for American politics. So I don't know if you've been following, but what are some specific examples? The Brett Kavanaugh, everybody knows about that, right? I mean, that's not just a US news, that's a worldwide news. And what's so interesting about the Brett Kavanaugh case is if you follow the tweets of Republicans, they are looking at the same exact situation, they are looking at the same exact data, everything, but what they say is Brett Kavanaugh is such an upright person. He not only has a skill set, but he has the integrity and the character to hold that office for life, and they support him, like without any kind of compromise. But if you look at the tweets of people who are more democratic, they say, how can we do this? This is unjust. Obviously, he has anger management problems. Obviously, he is chauvinistic. He is not fit to be able to be on the Supreme Court. And what's so interesting about Twitter is we have people who have these Twitter accounts who know so much. They have so much knowledge. And you can tell by their education pedigree. They have so much experience in the political spheres. They have so much intelligence. They're able to analyze problems and they're able to articulate and defend their arguments. But they lack so much wisdom. Because when you see a Republican trying to argue or debate with a Democrat, what happens? Selfish ambition. There is disorder. There is every vile practice. Even though you have people who know so much, they are filled with knowledge. Even though you have people who are incredibly intelligent, because they lack wisdom, they're unable to have a meaningful dialogue where it exhorts peace, the gentleness that James is advocating right here. And we see this, Twitter obviously is an extreme example, but like I mentioned, James is not talking about his society. What James is talking about is his church. We're going to talk about this a little bit more next week, but in his church, not only was there jealousy and selfish ambition, people were fighting. And it sounds like it was probably physical violence. People were cursing at each other, as we saw last week. And we have to wonder if James's church was struggling with these really just juvenile sin. What hope do we have? Right? I mean, we're talking about James. He was the brother of Jesus. He was one of the pillars of the early church. And when you look at his church, people are fighting. Just imagine in a fellowship hall, people are just racing to the snacks because they want to get that last slice of pizza. And if somebody's about to beat you, you tackle that person. And you start dropping F-bombs because that person ate 3 slices and you've only had 1. Those are the type of things that are likely happening in James's church. And this really goes to the next question, is the church. And some of non-Christians, if you're a non-Christian, we welcome you. And maybe even for some of our Christians, we may be wondering, what is so special about our church? What is so special about any church? If the church, even James's church, experiences the same problems that society is struggling with, then what's the point of even going to church? How would you actually answer that to your non-Christian friend? Or how do you actually even answer that to yourself? And there are a few key points that I really want to emphasize. That yes, the church is very similar to society, but it's also very radically different in a way that is just so incredibly hopeful. So the first thing that I really want to emphasize is, yes, the church, our church, Uptown community, we struggle with the same shortcomings and sin that our society struggles with. We confront all we want. We can say, no, I don't struggle with jealousy. I don't struggle with selfish ambition. But trust me, there are going to be moments and seasons where God exposes the depths of your heart, and you're going to see, wow, I am actually more jealous than I thought. We struggle with the same exact things. But this is where one of the differences lie between the church and society. Second is, but we humbly acknowledge our shortcomings and sin. In society, you want to try to present yourself as upright as possible. In our church, we present ourselves as honestly as possible. Why? Because in the gospel, Jesus says that it is through our weaknesses that God is glorified. Yes, we struggle with sin. Yes, we struggle with shortcomings. And I'm not saying we should be boastful and proud about it, but we shouldn't be ashamed of it. Because every jealousy that you struggle with, every shortcoming, every character flaw that you are plagued with, that is an opportunity where you're going to experience the power of the gospel overcome that. And that leads to the third thing that I really want to sear in our hearts and our minds. Why is a church any different than society? And we blank our shortcomings and sin. And the reason why I put this as a blank is because most churches are going to answer this not the most complete way. And it will make sense in a second. So most churches, most Christians will say, yes, we struggle with the same sin. Yes, we humbly acknowledge our shortcomings and sin. And most Christians, most churches would say, and we have been forgiven of our shortcomings and sin. Case closed, and we live happily ever after, and let's move on. But with James and with what I sense in Uptown is we don't just stop here. I know this is true, and this is something we should celebrate, the forgiveness of God, but what I really want us to focus on, and what James focuses on, is not so much whether or not we've been forgiven, but what James focuses on is, and we have the power to overcome our shortcomings and sin. And even though it may seem like it's a subtle difference, the difference actually speaks volumes in your everyday lives. Because if all you focus on is the fact that you've been forgiven, you are going to be stagnant in your Christian life. There's not going to be any testimonies in your Christian life. You're basically short-circuiting God's gospel. But we have to take it one step further, and this is where James really focuses on, is not only have we been forgiven, but the reason why we've been forgiven is because we have the power to overcome our shortcomings and sins. So yes, we should humbly acknowledge that we struggle with lust, with materialism, all the same things our society struggles with. But we don't just stop there because we've been forgiven. Instead, we take it the next step further. Because the gospel is so powerful, because just like we sang about, He is the everlasting God, that means that lust, that materialism, that jealousy, that selfish ambition, the disorder, all the different things, God can actually overcome that because of the power of the gospel. So this is where the church is so different. And this is also one of the reasons why we want to do more exhortation time. Because in our exhortation time, basically what we're doing is we're testifying to other people, I am experiencing in my life the power of the gospel overcoming these various shortcomings. And yes, your life is not going to be perfect. You're still going to struggle with doubts. You're still going to struggle with questions, anxieties, worries, whatever. But that's what this church is about. We embrace it, we acknowledge it, but at the same time we overcome it. Let's move on to true wisdom. So James focuses on what actually is true wisdom. What actually is true wisdom? Because wisdom is probably something that we don't really hear too much in our society. So what actually is wisdom? Let's take a look at this. And what James talks about is not so much what wisdom is, but he talks about if you're truly wise, then these are the results of wisdom. And we're going to take a look at this one step at a time. So, like I mentioned earlier, who is wise and understanding among you? By his good conduct, let him show his works in the meekness of wisdom. I'm just going to provide some examples to help us understand what some of these things are. So one of these results that he talks about is good conduct and the meekness of wisdom. What does that look like in our everyday lives? So, as you know, I have 3 kids, Jude, Juliet, and Jubilee. Jude just turned 9 about a month ago. And, okay, just keep this, don't talk to Jude about this. I always feel kind of bad about talking about them during our sermons, but it will be very helpful. So Jude, maybe a year or 2 ago, we had him take a test because we felt like he wasn't really doing all that well in school. And we felt like, I think he needs to take a test to measure his IQ. So he took the IQ test, and I was there with him. It probably takes about 3 hours, and he destroyed this IQ test. He loved it. We were talking to the assessor, and the assessor said not only did Jude score exceptionally high, but when we saw him, when he's confronted with problems, like difficult problems that most kids shy away from, she said, I noticed his eyes lit up. And for him, it was like a puzzle. It was like a riddle for him to solve. So he did really well on the test. And again, for me, I try not to make too much of a fuss about it because, again, wisdom is superior to intelligence and knowledge. So Jude finds out that he did well on the test, and Jude doesn't really know what that actually means. So he's like, yeah, Daddy, I think I did well on the test. I'm like, yeah, you did really well on the test. I try not to talk about it too much because I don't want him to think that it's really all that important. But once there was a time where he thought this was important. And I remember him saying to somebody, yeah, I'm a smart person, I'm intelligent. And I don't think he's being boastful, I think he's just saying it as a matter of fact. But when I felt like at one point he was kind of being boastful about it, I said, Jude. And I gave him that stern voice that every parent needs to have. I gave him that piercing stare into his eyes, and he was looking uncomfortable. And I said, Jude, does Daddy care if you're smart? And I don't think he knew what to say, so he just said no. Said no. I said, Daddy does not care what your IQ score is. Daddy could care less if you're smart. Do you think Daddy is proud that you're intelligent? And he said no. I said, what Daddy cares about is not if you're intelligent or if you're smart. If you grow up to be an intelligent and smart person, but you don't know how to love your sisters, if you don't know how to love the person who's not cool in class, I'm going to be so disappointed in you. And yeah, I know as a parent, you should never be disappointed in your child, but I really want to sear into his heart. Wisdom trumps intelligence. I said, Daddy does not care about your report cards. Daddy doesn't care about what university you're going to get into. What Daddy cares about is how loving are you to Jubilee, even though she is so annoying. How patient are you with your friends? How well are you? What is your conduct? How meek are you with your wisdom? And for many of us, especially when we think about our society, when we think about the interview questions, when we think about what is the ideal candidate to be competitive for that job position or to get into that academic program, we focus all our efforts on knowledge and intelligence. And we care very little about wisdom. And yes, we should grow in our knowledge. Yes, we should grow in our intelligence. But we should also not get so swept away by society. Wisdom trumps intelligence and knowledge. And how do you know if you're wise? Check your conduct. Are you being meek? Are you being loving? Are you being humble to other people? James also talks about other ways, other characteristics of wisdom. And he says this in verses 17 to 18. I'm just going to highlight a few and provide an example. And the next series of words that I'll highlight is, but the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits. So like I mentioned earlier, I worked as a software developer and then turned more into product management in a software development company. I was working for about 6 years, and I really enjoyed it. And I was at one point in my career, I was part of the hiring process because we wanted to bring in new people, making sure that they're smart, making sure that they're intelligent. And yeah, I'll be honest, when I interview these candidates, most of my interview questions are about what they know and how intelligent they are. But there is one candidate that I was like, we should not bring this guy on board. I really don't think it's going to be a good fit. But everybody else is saying, no, we're going to bring this person on board, and I feel good about him. And I felt a little like, wow, you should probably just listen to me, whatever, but whatever. So we hired this person, and this person was not that he was unproductive, but he was just making so many mistakes left and right. And I know that this person was being sincere, this person was trying his hardest, but it was just really bad to the point where other people, they were recognizing, wow, we made a drastic mistake. And I was working with this person because he was part of a project that I was managing. And whenever we had our meetings, whenever we had our project status meetings, at this point, this person had a pretty bad reputation. But I made it a point that whenever I talked about any kind of work or task that this person was responsible for, I never dogged this person. Because for me, or at least for James, wisdom is about being gentle, and it's about being full of mercy and good fruits. And whenever there is an opportunity for me to actually showcase a positive contribution that this person made, I would go out of my way to name this individual and say, because of this person, we're able to discover this, because of this, we're able to overcome that, even though that list is very short, there weren't too many examples. But one way of exercising this type of wisdom is, are we being gentle? Are we being full of mercy and good fruits? Many times there are going to be situations where you are absolutely right. And it's so tempting for you to say, I told you so. And I'm looking at all the married couples, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But true wisdom is not only are you gentle, but you're full of mercy, full of good fruits. And especially in those moments where you could easily say, hey, I told you so, I was right. In those moments, you show mercy. That's the type of wisdom that God is looking for. Another example. So what are some other things that James talks about? He talks about how wisdom must be open to reason, impartial, and sincere. And here I'll give an example, an embarrassing example. So when I first began to work, this was immediately after graduating from undergrad, I was so fired up to share the gospel, right? I was like, you know what? Whichever company hires me, this company is going to, the gospel's going to take over. From the lowest employee to the highest executive to the CEO, whatever. And I remember one of the first lunches, it was like a team lunch where we were just trying to get to know each other. And they were saying, oh, so what are you into? I said, yeah, Jesus. Went to church, just very straight up. And then they were asking, oh, how do you know Jesus is it's interesting. But how do you know, all the things that you read about, how Jesus resurrected, how do you know it's true? And, growing up in the church, nobody ever asked me that question. Because everybody within the church, you just automatically assume that everything that we read in the Bible is true. So I was deer in the headlights. I didn't know what to say. But at the same time, because I was young, because I was very passionate, I needed to say something. I said, yeah, we know Jesus, his body. We could just, his body is there. He resurrected, so we know that his body, they're like, what do you mean his body? How do you know if that body is Jesus' body? I was like, yeah, we could probably just do DNA scans and just figure out that it's not anybody else. And then somebody said, wait, I thought, didn't Jesus resurrect and go to heaven? Isn't the point that his body is no longer here? And it's have you ever watched one of those Southwest commercials where you want to be somewhere else? I felt so embarrassed. I realized I was just talking out of my rear the whole time. I was so passionate. I was not open to reason. I was not impartial, and I was not sincere. But one of the really cool things about evangelism is, how do you get better at evangelism? Is it by reading books? Is it by attending conferences? By listening to a very just learned apologetic professor? The best way to grow in your evangelism is to make mistakes and to learn from them. So after that day, after that lunch, it was so embarrassing, and I couldn't sleep that night. I just felt I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror, and I really had to think through, okay, if that question ever comes up, how am I going to answer that? I can't be talking about Jesus' body and DNA scans. That makes no sense. What was I even thinking? So I was thinking about, okay, as a non-Christian, what would be convincing, and what's actually true? And I was doing some research, and then lo and behold, I had another conversation. Same question came up, and they said, well, how do you know that this is true? I said, well, this is part of the reason why faith is so important. But faith is not just blind faith. One thing that we know is Jesus' followers, at least 3 of them, they died because they preached, they believed, they were so convinced that Jesus resurrected. At least 3 of them. And I'm just thinking, why would these people die for something that's clearly a lie? And I'm not saying that that's the best answer, but that was at least impartial, at least I was open to reason. And what you do with evangelism is not so much you answer all their questions. The best evangelists are the ones who actually are open to reason, impartial, sincere. Namely, when somebody asks you a question and you don't know, instead of just thinking of something and just letting words come out, you say, you know what, that's a great question. Let me think about that. And then what you do is, the next time you see that person, you say, hey, I really, like I mentioned earlier, I'm really thankful for what you brought up, that one question, and it got me to think. And as I was thinking, I think this is how I would respond. And when a non-Christian hears that, what that does is they realize this person actually values my questions, this person values my skepticism, and this person is not just some fundamentalist who just blindly follows the faith. This person actually thinks. This person is actually open to reason. This person is actually sincere. And that's the kind of wisdom that we really need in our evangelism. And these are all things that, they're not spectacular things. These are things that happen in our everyday conversations. Whether it's through a coworker at the water cooler, whether it's through a neighbor, whether it's something at home. These are all ways that we can express God's wisdom in our everyday living. The last example that I'll highlight is wisdom from above is first pure, and then notice he talks about peace 3 times, then peaceable, and he goes on and goes on. In verse 18 he says, and a harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. So for James, the number one characteristic of true wisdom is, are you a peacemaker? Are you pure in how you're interacting with one another? I'm not sure if there are people who are more on the cynical side. I'm actually a very critical, cynical person, so if you are cynical, critical, then I think we'll actually get along. But I know for people who are very cynical and critical, it's really hard for them to express their thoughts and ideas. What James is saying here is, you might be right. People who are critical and cynical, by and large, they are usually right. But their problem is, they don't know how to express their ideas and thoughts in a way where it conveys peace, in a way that conveys this type of loving wisdom that James is talking about. And the last example that I'll give as far as peace, like even though you're right, it's not so much, just because you're right doesn't mean you get to just say it and blabber it however you want. You still have to express your ideas with this kind of wisdom. And the last example that I'll give is something that happened actually yesterday. So I mentioned earlier that as a leadership team, Uptown, deacons, pastoral staff, everybody, we met yesterday to talk about 2019's budget. It's a big topic. And there's a lot of different things that we have to think about in terms of Uptown, all the different ministries and impact groups, what happens in worship service, all the behind the scene activity and tasks that go on for us to do what we're doing. So there's a lot of things to talk about, and at the same time, it's a very important discussion because we're talking about money. We're talking about hard-earned financial resources, right? So we're being very careful, but at the same time, I know that people are very convicted about certain things. And one of the things that I really am just so blessed by our Uptown community, especially the leadership, is I saw this kind of wisdom firsthand. Did we agree on most things? Yes. And we are a very united team. I'm very thankful. That's God's grace. But there are moments where we just simply did not agree on certain things. And I could tell just people were pretty heated internally. People felt very convicted about certain things and they kind of restrained themselves. And what I saw this commitment that even though we may differ on a few things, we're still going to express these differences in a way where we establish and maintain peace. And this is really not part of the message, but one of the things I really loved about yesterday's meeting is we weren't just talking about events. We weren't just talking about dates. We weren't just talking about dollars and cents. What we were really talking about were not individuals like we're gossiping, but we're talking about people. The decisions that we make, how we utilize our financial resources, how we set up the calendar for the year. Yeah, it's not perfect. We're going to make a lot of mistakes, so what I'm asking is please pray for us. But what I'm really trying to say is I was just so blown away by the fact that everything that we did was not just crunching numbers. It was not just intelligence of analyzing problems. It was not just knowledge of, based on my experience, we have to do it this way. It was more about how can we best love people like this? How can we best love this pocket of people who are struggling in this area? How can we best equip and support and empower these people who are fired up for this? That's the kind of wisdom that James is saying that the church needs. And trust me, that kind of wisdom trumps intelligence and knowledge. I don't care how smart you are. I don't care how much you know. I don't care about your experience. I don't care about your resume. Show me, like James is saying, how are you actually living your life? The last thing that we're going to talk about is, why does God care? Because everything that I shared up until now is really a nice self-help talk. Everything that I just talked about, you can hear at some secular podcasts about how to improve your life. You know why? Because we didn't talk about God. All we did was talk about wisdom, and all we did was talk about ourselves. The most important question in any Bible study, any sermon is, what does this actually convey? What can we actually learn about who God is, about the character of God? So the last question we're going to ask ourselves is, why does God care? And here I just want to make a mention. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above. And he says this again. The wisdom from above is gentleness, all these different things. First, pure, peaceable, all these different things. And the reason why I really want to emphasize this is, yes, we can be inspired by all these examples. We can be inspired to try to be as harmonious and as peaceful as we want. But that peace is going to fail eventually. That peace is going to be superficial, unless it comes directly from our relationship with God. Why does God care about wisdom more than intelligence and knowledge? It's because this is the way God interacts with us. When God interacts with us, he doesn't showcase his knowledge. He doesn't say, well, look at my resume. I created all the universe in 6 days. Look at what I did for you on the cross. When God loves us, and when we present our problems to him, he doesn't just give us his intelligence. Oh, you just got to do this. Oh, how are you struggling with this issue? It's so simple. When we go to God with our problems, when we go to God with all of our shortcomings and sin, God is not just intelligent. God isn't just knowledgeable to us. God is wise to us in the way that James describes. In other words, when we come before God, God is pure to us. God is sincere to us. He is gentle to us. He doesn't just look at us, point his finger down at us, and say, how are you struggling with this problem that you've been struggling with for the past decade? He's gentle. This is the type of wisdom that God has first poured into us. And if we have truly experienced this kind of wisdom, then how can we not express this wisdom to other people? That is the starting point. That is the foundation for how we can actually be wise in this area. So as a summary, as we kind of close up, James in today's society, this is a very relevant, such a timely message. Because in our society, we focus so much on intelligence. We focus so much on knowledge, but we value so little. Are we actually loving each other? Are we actually being wise in the way the Bible talks about wisdom? And yes, the church struggles with the same things, but we are different. Because not only do we struggle with the same things, not only do we humbly acknowledge these things, but we say, you know what? I have a Savior who has overcome this. I have the power of the gospel that will enable me to overcome my jealousy, overcome my selfish ambition. What is wisdom? True wisdom is, are you truly living, are you using all of your resources, whether it's your knowledge, whether it's your experience, whether it's your intellectual capabilities, not to showcase, not to climb up that corporate ladder, but to actually love people, to actually show mercy, to actually show good works. And lastly, why does God care about all this? Is because this is how God relates with us. He loves us with such gentleness. He never puts us down. He is so sensitive, so sincere with us. So as Ben comes forward, I just want to just lead us into a time of just reflection. Let me make this thing crystal clear. In God's people, there is no such thing as wise Christians, unwise Christians. You're either a Christian who's wise or not. In God's people, there's no such thing as there are radical Christians and there are ordinary Christians. No. If you're a Christian, you're radical. Period. There's no gray area. The reason why I say that is because if our Heavenly Father is truly wise to us in the way that James described, then His children will likewise be wise. Simple fact. If you're not wise, if you're not growing in your wisdom, you think you're a child, but you're not. You're an illegitimate child. There is no such thing as ordinary Christians in God's household. Because if we have tasted how radical His love is for us, as we sang about, why would a holy King die for us? Why would He suffer? Why would He sweat? Why would He pour out His blood for us? How can you be a lukewarm Christian? If we are children of God, then we will be like Him. My kids, they're going to be like Jeannie and I. Jeannie and I were short. Our kids are going to be short. That's how I know they're my kids. If I want Jude to grow in his wisdom, what does he need to do? He needs to spend time with God. Because when you spend time with God, the source of wisdom, you can't help but to be blown away. God, you're so gentle. You are so sincere in your love for me. You are so humble. You are the true peacemaker, because in the midst of my stress, I'm able to experience true peace. Brothers and sisters, I urge you, please look to this God. Make yourself available to Him. Experience His wisdom. Experience His radical love. As you do that, I guarantee you will grow in your wisdom. People would say, wow, that person is a radical Christian.